Today on Exodus Brothers, we're joined by Cheryl, a filmmaker based in Santa Cruz, known for inclusive, collaborative sets and powerful, human-centered storytelling. She grew up deeply embedded in evangelism, eventually navigating a long, painful exit that reshaped her life and her voice as an artist.
Out of that journey came her upcoming feature film, Girlie, a late 90s coming-of-age story that blends humor, heartbreak, and the shared experience of so many who have left high-control religion. Everywhere the script goes, people say the same thing. This feels like my story.
We're excited to talk with her about her background, her creative work, and why now is the moment for a film like Girlie. Cheryl, welcome to Exodus Brothers.
Wow, that was quite the intro. Thank you. Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I'm a fan of the pod, so happy to be a guest.
Yeah, so kind of going back to the beginning, what was church like for you growing up, and kind of paint a picture of your childhood, what that looked like inside of that world?
Yeah, my early life, we were in a church that was, in retrospect, kind of a cult, sort of on the, Gothard model, I guess. My uncle was the pastor and rigidly controlled sort of everything about our lives in a way, or tried to. My parents were both a little bit the black sheep of their families, but, and I went to the school that met on that church campus. So it really was quite insular. It was, family and church, and that was kind of it. And then my parents had kind of a falling out with just feeling the rigidity. My dad's an attorney, and my mom is a hairstylist, and they both have like a streak of rebellion in them that I think they passed on to me. And they decided they just couldn't go there anymore. And so they started attending an evangelical free church. And so I pretty much grew up in the EV free churches, one in particular from first grade all the way through when we left the church for the first time. And I was an adult with children. We were in the same church. And the sort of daily life of that, I mean, I'm sure you guys are familiar, especially at the free church, it is your life. It's 2 services on Sunday, and you better be at both of them, morning and evening. Then there's a Wednesday night. Then there's probably another night. Then sometimes you're doing, something with either youth group or something else on Saturday, and then, rinse and repeat. And so it doesn't leave a lot of space for other things. And I think that's by design. So yeah, my growing up, my whole life in many ways was the church.
And would you say the second church was also cult-like the first church?
It didn't give that vibe at first. You have to remember, so I'm, obviously a little bit older than y'all. So we started going there in the 70s, sort of before the big swing towards the political right.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say those early years, it was more social. I mean, it was a very in retrospect, a church that worshiped the Bible, as many evangelical churches do. But it didn't have that sort of the cult-like feeling that crept in later.
What was that like when it did creep in?
There started to be, no longer are we apolitical, but we're going to take a really hard stance on, say, one of the first things was like abortion. And the free churches tend to try and stay out of politics, but that sort of influence from the religious right creeps in. And, you start seeing everybody wearing, little Walk for Life pins, and certain things are taboo, and things just start to get a little bit more closed down. And we start hearing a lot more about hell. I think we clocked with evangelical culture as it became more, and I hate to use the word conservative because it kind of doesn't fit anymore, but became more insular and more us against them.
And was it fairly fundamental too, as far as the Bible is the inerrant word of God and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing, because the free church, not to jump ahead too much, but when I was really searching for why aren't women allowed to be leaders here? Just trying to dig in to some of the history of the church. The original charter of the evangelical free churches was I think 40% women pastors. And up until World War II, they could, ordain women. They just almost felt a little bit more open, almost mainline. And then after World War II, they shut all that down. And now if you talk to anybody who is in one of those churches, they will say, no, it's always been this way. We've always had these rules in place, particularly around, women in leadership and other sort of hot button issues. And they began to lean more into the like inerrancy and just more, what I would call worship of the Bible.
Yeah, and what were some of the core messages that you felt like you were absorbing as a kid, or your role as a girl?
Oh gosh. When I was quite young and we were still in the really culty church, I remember being 4 years old. I remember it like yesterday in Sunday school, being sat down by my teacher and being told that I was going to hell if I didn't pray with her right now. And so my quote unquote testimony story was that I became a Christian at age 4. But what does a 4-year-old know? If you tell them that you're going to burn forever and you're going to be separated from mommy and daddy and everyone you love. And so that was kind of the beginning of sort of my little mind trying to grasp what faith was. And what was interesting too is for me, I was afraid of hell, but my kind of dirty little secret is I was almost equally afraid of heaven.
Mm.
I tried to not think about it. I tried to not think about either of them, but I was always an artist. I was the little kid drawing in the corner or reading or whatever. And the tedium of the picture of heaven that was painted for us was like terror to me. And I can remember as an adult even having like a visceral fear of it. And then as far as, being born a girl, there was always limitations. We're going to do a spiritual gift survey, but guess what? These are blue. They're not for you. The assumption that I was going to marry young, that I should be, praying for my future husband right now as a junior hire. Yeah, it was a sort of more intense version of our culture and how we sort of treat women. Really sort of a narrow view. And I would say that the free church did a little better job of being less clamped down on that, but it was still there. And many of my friends married men who were older, which is very typical in evangelicalism. There wasn't a lot of emphasis on young women, having careers and getting educated. And if you got a college degree, that was kind of a bonus, but your real goal was to get married, have kids.
Yeah, it's that fear indoctrination, right? It's like, do you actually have a choice if that fear is being embedded into you to believe in it?
Yeah,
And choosing out of fear rather than choosing out of love.
agreed. Yeah. I was very careful not to ever push that on my kids because that just left such a mark on me.
Yeah, I bet. It's you don't want to pass on some of the things that you've worked to move away from. But it sounds like you became a youth leader as well. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
What would you say pulled you into that, and what did you believe you were offering to teens and people?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two answers to that. One was, so I married really young, and I married a man who is wonderful, and I'm still married to him, which I think is a miracle. But he is almost 6 years older than me. So he was my youth leader, which, back in the day, they would let you graduate from high school, and then the next month, you got to be a youth leader in that same group that you just graduated from. Yeah, so he was my youth leader. And after we got married, he really wanted to continue working with high schoolers. And I was like, okay, I've had some experience teaching, and I really like the creativity of this age group. I find them like really compelling and interesting. So it wasn't a hard sell for me to be like, okay, this can be our ministry as a couple. And then we just kind of became like lifer youth workers. When I wasn't pregnant or whatever, we were very embedded with the youth group. And I think in many ways it was a safe space for experimentation, creativity. And honestly, we just didn't fit in going to the young couples Sunday school class and having yet another potluck. We just couldn't do it.
Yeah. So do you remember when things shifted and started feeling off or noticing red flags? When did that occur?
We had a lot of tragedy in our church, including my cousin who was very dear to me, who lived with me. And she had a boyfriend in the youth group who I was also friends with, turned out to be quite an abuser, stalked her for many years, even after she married my husband's best friend, and eventually murdered her outside of her work.
Oh, wow.
And so there was just a darkness. Like, if you'd attend an evangelical church, and you guys probably know this, there's this veneer of happy, shiny people. It's really like everybody's just so nice. And so, but then why in this group of people that are so nice are there predators? Like, another cousin got pulled off by a predatory man who basically convinced her to become an emancipated minor and marry him. And he was abusive. We had pedophiles. I mean, it is dark.
Some of the worst people, right?
Some of the worst people. And, you're raised to believe that the church is a space where all the bad people are on the outside and we're the good people and we're protecting you.
Yes.
And what you discover is that, no, that's actually not true. The church attracts predators because they love the rinse and repeat of confession and reconciliation.
That's a great way to put it.
It is a magnet for predators, narcissists, just read the news.
Yeah.
It's really coming to light. But yeah, so some of that. And then I started to get more involved in, really for the first time in what we would call secular art. And I was very involved in the downtown art scene in San Jose where I was living. I was doing more experimental work. I was an installation artist, just starting to build genuine community with groups of people who were not believers and finding that these were groups of very safe people and realizing I had not had that in the church. And so it was just this, the two worlds. This is kind of a theme for me. I have two worlds and they're always colliding. So there was that. There was, women in leadership. There was increasingly realizing that I think hell was just a made up story. And just my theology started to get some cracks in it as well. And, meanwhile, I'm putting on this very artistic gathering where we're exploring ancient practices and like, well, maybe the church was right this many years ago or this many years ago, or, if we could just go back far enough and get rid of all this stuff, maybe there's a pure faith in there somewhere. And so exploring that. But when that first gathering ended, it ended as a result of the church not wanting, it was founded by a woman who is a good friend of mine, who's one of the best preachers I've ever heard. And I was kind of the arts pastor. So it was the two of us. And the church was so threatened by two women creating something that was gaining in popularity that they shut us down.
Wow.
And that caused our small family to just abruptly leave the church, even though we'd been there for decades. And so that was our first time leaving. It took a couple of times to fully leave, but that was the first big thing that felt like a divorce.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like you touched on something that's very vital for a lot of people that deconstruct, which is that having, quote unquote, secular friends outside of your, religious bubble is very helpful for sort of breaking, little cracks starting to appear as safe places outside of the church where you realize, hey, this isn't as bad as they're saying it is. And these people are actually more supportive and actually more healthy and more, they're actually there for me in ways that the church people aren't.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of different elements came together to lead you to deconstructing, but were you and your husband on the same journey together? How did that work? Because I know that can be really difficult if you're not on the same page with your partner.
Yeah, surprisingly, we have been on the same page. I mean, I think there have been times where I'm sort of more the naturally intellectual of the two of us. So I would do a bunch of research, read a bunch of things, kind of share with him where I was at. And he'd be like, well, I'm not quite there yet. Let me process this. And then, but very quickly, he and I were on the same page. And I think that's actually something that shows up in Girlie. I wanted to show a family that was sort of tumbling out of evangelicalism together, rather than a child, you know, leaving and rebelling. Because really for us, it was our family kind of finding our way out together.
How did everyone else respond in the church?
It is so weird. They do what church people do. Like, you may get a message or two like, "Hey, missed you," and then there's this strange, like, "Okay, I guess our relationships are all over." And what I realized is if they could no longer, and I'm not pointing to individuals, I'm pointing to the system, but if the system can no longer extract your money, labor, and creativity, they're gonna move on. And that was actually really eye-opening and also heartbreaking because the first time we left, we lost kinda like everyone we knew all at once. It was like a divorce in that way, and the church got custody of everyone.
Yeah.
And so it feels like the bottom falls out of your life in a really painful way.
And what were you feeling? Like, what was what were you going through? Were you feeling grief, or was it relief, fear, liberation? What feelings were you having, or was it kind of a roller coaster?
It's like a roller coaster of all of the above. Um, I would say both times we left, it was profound grief. Like, the first time when we left our big church that we'd been at for so many years, I got to where I could not be anywhere near that campus and not burst into tears. And I'm sensitive, but I'm not a cry at the drop of a hat person, and I literally couldn't be around it. It was a deep, deep sense of grief. And then even afterwards, I kind of felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But then there was also, a certain amount of, like, relief and freedom. That first time we left, our kids were elementary school, and we did a whole year of just fun Sundays, just
Nice.
something fun every Sunday, trying to reclaim, honestly, the grief over how much of their childhood we had given to the church. I still have a lot of guilt and grief over how much of their childhood I gave away. Like, they didn't have a mom when they should have had a mom because I was working at the church. I was, again, giving my time, money, and creativity to put on a show every week when I should have been spending it with them. And they don't fault me for that, to their credit. They're such wonderful humans. We've talked about this a lot, but it's a guilt that I don't know I'll ever let go.
I think reclaiming the Sundays is a great idea, and I think that you obviously showed that you cared about them, and I'm sure they felt that. So, just curious how you rebuilt your identity after the collapse of that world for you.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something really key when you say identity, because the church wants to be your identity. They want your identity to be submerged in what they would call Christ, but really is this corporate entity that is the church. They want you to kind of disappear. And, that happens in subtle and not subtle ways. As an artist in the church, it means that your work is not your own. And when the blinders are kind of taken off, you see how much money and influence and all of that the church, and particularly the men at the top, are extracting from people. And so, yeah, it's a rebuilding in so many ways. It's a rebuilding of who am I outside of this, lifelong identity of being the Christian, the Christian artist, the youth leader. And I don't know, it's a very deep exploration that you kind of have to go on because nobody's telling you who you are. You have to actually do the work and figure that out.
Hmm.
And I think people experience a lot of confusion and loneliness and struggling for identity after they leave organized religion.
Yeah. People intertwine their belief systems and their religion with their identities. And then once they deconstruct those, then they have to figure out, like, who am I? And that was a very difficult thing for me as well, is like just navigating that and figuring out who I really am and, who am I naturally.
Yeah, I feel like those of us who've deconstructed that grew up in the church have a little bit of an arrested development, and we have to parent ourselves into our true identity. And I said that to somebody who had not deconstructed one time mistakenly, and they were deeply offended by the thought that anyone in the church could have that sort of immaturity in them. But I think it's so true.
I think it's a great way to put it, honestly.
Yeah. And so we have to grow up in ways that we weren't allowed to. And that's super hard. And for me, I think it was a healing of a kind of schism that had existed in me since as long as I can remember. This part of me that was separate from my Christian identity, that felt like it didn't fit in, that felt strange and weird, and letting that actually just breathe and be like, oh, this might be actually who I am. And I might be able to fuse those two halves of myself back together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that feels like an ongoing process in my life.
Yeah. When you're used to being a passenger on the bus and suddenly you get to be the driver of your own car, you're like, where do I want to go? What do I want to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sort of feeling. But it also gives you a little bit of hope. You have all this new world open up to you, and there's like this excitement and things you can go and explore, and there's no shame or guilt if you make the wrong choice. You can go, okay, that's a learning lesson. I can learn from that and move on. But not that I'm going to be guilted into thinking that I've done something wrong, or I'm shameful, or I'm sinful, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I have over the years felt so comfortable with queer community, is because I think in many ways my experience in the church was a type of being closeted.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously nothing like, somebody who's struggling with, their own sexual identity and that literally being a sin. I mean, I don't want to equate, but there always was a sense of being closeted, and that if people in the church knew the real me, they would reject me.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, that's to not be accepted for who you are either way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so moving on to your professional life, you call yourself an unapologetically inclusive director. Does that feel like a direct response to the way that you grew up?
I don't know if it's a response or if it's me like trying to just be genuinely who I am. I was lucky enough to have, I think part of the tension that I felt growing up is that my life at home and my life at church were often quite different. Like I said, my parents are both a little bit rebellious. So, for example, my dad was chairman of the elder board for many years, but he also got in trouble for saying when he taught Sunday school that he didn't believe abortion was a sin. And we were the house where, I can remember being a child and waking up in the middle of the night, and there was my distant cousin on the doorstep with her kids, escaping an abusive marriage. Like, my mom has always just been she's such a unique person. Like, she has friends that are younger than me. And even when she was in her 30s and 40s, she had friends that were in their 80s. She's just extremely open and inclusive person. And I think I got that from her. And so, yeah, our industry is so flattening, especially on the commercial side, can be so one dimensional. And it's really, really important to me to center people that fall outside of that, to the best I can within the constraints of obviously marketing and all that. But I don't want to approach my work with this narrow idea of who gets to be seen. And one of the questions that I ask, on a project when I come on board is who are we centering and why? And that tells us so much about what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Instead of just the dogmatic approach, this is the way it needs to be done. This is the formula you need to follow.
Yeah. For example, back in the day, we'd get a commercial script and it would always be like, oh, the boss, well, obviously that's a he. And then,
Mm-hmm.
the associate, well, that's going to be a she. And, oh, let's throw in a person of color here, just, in a non-speaking role. Like,
Yeah.
and a lot of that has gotten a lot better, but there are tropes, and I try and be questioning those.
Yes. As a fellow filmmaker, I completely understand
Yeah.
what you're talking about. On the narrative side, you tend to gravitate towards anti-ageist female-led stories that tend to be raw, emotional, and darkly funny. Where does that come from? What draws you to those topics?
I have experienced the, I'm old enough now that I'm completely invisible, which can be a superpower, but is also a challenge. And it's really important to me to show people of all ages, but particularly women, over 40, in roles that do not show them dimming, but show them actually opening to other things, actually moving forward and expanding, taking up more space. And that's a tough sell in entertainment. So, yeah, that's something I'm committed to. I tend to write stories like that. And the darkly funny, my writing has always been kind of that way. I did a lot of writing even in the church, plays and funny skits and things, and they always kind of had that little twist to them. It's probably just the way I think.
I feel like there's a lot of us that grew up in the church that are also artists and filmmakers that have that dark humor inside us.
Dark humor is a good coping mechanism, and it's like there's that saying, whatever doesn't kill you gives you a dark sense of humor.
I love that. Oh, I might steal that. It's so good.
No, that's great. And I love that you're telling stories like that. I know Hollywood is very ageist in that way. I feel like there's a lot of people, executives, whoever that work high up, that, they don't want to cast people that are over a certain age. And I think that's awful. And I think there should be stories of all sorts that tackle every part of life. And there's so much room for that and so many stories that need to be told in that space.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We had a hot minute there where women were kind of allowed to age, 5 years ago. And now it's been decreed that no, actually, they all need to look 35, and they also need to be so skinny that they are virtually invisible.
Yes.
It's wild what's going on in culture right now.
What about for someone hearing about it for the first time? Could you kind of summarize what Girlie is all about?
Sure. It is a coming of age film, but the whole family comes of age. And it's about a family spiraling out of evangelicalism in the late 90s. So, closeted college student finds forbidden love on a Christian campus, while at home her family faces a crisis that can't be prayed away. So this, funnily enough, I think it might be the first feature-length script I ever wrote.
Oh, wow.
I wrote this as I was myself spiraling out. I think it was kind of at the tail end of, leaving the church for the final time. And it's informed by so many of my queer friends' experiences. And I felt like there wasn't anything out there for them to actually see themselves represented in this, what has become sort of an iconic coming of age format. But it's interesting, as I wrote it, it really did become an entire family, coming of age, coming of middle. And I feel like in many ways, I've been each of the characters in this. It has a very strong mom character, as well as, our lead and sibling. And my goal is to let you feel what it felt like to grow up evangelical from the inside without any sort of external commentary. And I haven't seen this done very well. There's the faith-based film market, and then there's sort of really over-the-top things like Righteous Gemstones.
Mm-hmm.
The closest analogy is women talking about the women in the sort of Mennonite style cult. And
yes.
I loved how you lived inside of their world in that film. And I'd like it to feel sort of as grounded as that.
I love that. That's a good example.
Yeah. And it's been so interesting too. I call this film my little cicada, because I wrote it, all those years ago, 2012 or something. And then at one point I did a table read at a queer Christian conference in Portland, and just such a beautiful thing, these queer Christian college kids all just kind of crying over this script. But at the time, every producer that saw it was like, love the script, but Obama's president, we're done with all this. And it was just like, okay, it's not the time for this. So I put it away and literally didn't even think about it until a little over a year ago. when somebody found it, I think on IMDb, and was like, "Oh, are you still making this?" And I revisited the script, did a bunch of rewrites on it because, baby's first script, it needed some work. And then sort of shopped it again, and it turned out this is the time for it. Our latest table read was just absolutely beautiful, and just a random group of Bay Area actors, and ended up like 3 of them were queer, former Christian or Mormon kids. And I think it's the time for it. It's weirdly subversive now, whereas, back when I wrote it, it probably wouldn't have been.
Yeah, the timing is everything. And of course, it's great to have things that people can relate to, but also fresh stories that are not just rehashings of other stories. So, yeah.
Yeah, and same as a fellow filmmaker who's working on films about the deconstruction space as well. I love that you're doing this because I feel like I had the same feeling. I looked around and was like, there's not many films really about this that are just about the experience of walking away from it. Like you said, without it being over the top or faith based, there's not a lot in this sort of middle ground. And I love that you're obviously telling it from this perspective, and especially the female perspective, which is very powerful. There's a lot of, you know, there's the purity angle there. There's the shame and the guilt. There's a lot of extra elements there as well. What do you ultimately want to say with the movie? What would you hope to, have audiences take away from it?
Yeah, I'm always hesitant on that. I just, as an artist, I feel like I make something that I believe is true, and trust that this is the right thing for the right people at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
I think my hope is that people will see themselves in the story. And maybe because it is kind of a period film now, which, wasn't initially intended to be, but it definitely is, we have enough distance that it can provide some sort of on-ramp, I don't know, or off-ramp, or sort of scaffolding for how does it feel to be in the process of letting this go.
Mm-hmm.
I'm confident that if I do what I'm supposed to do as an artist, that this work will mean things that I've never thought of.
Sorry, I think you mentioned that this Exodus is one of the biggest untold cultural stories of the last 30 years. I guess, like, what conversations are you hoping it starts inside maybe church spaces even?
I think people who watch it or who are drawn to it are probably going to be people who are, if they're in church spaces, they're on the edge, they're questioning. But I think interestingly, it will give people a little bit of a time capsule, because it really is like the church before this sort of Christian nationalist era really took hold.
Mm-hmm.
The 3 of us in this room, my family, others, we're the ones that left and created the void that was filled by what we have now.
Yeah.
And I think I want people to see what that was like. Even though it's not necessarily a positive portrayal, it's going to feel like a time capsule in that way, and allow people to like rewind just a bit. So yeah, I don't know what conversations it would spark in churches. I suspect the current church would absolutely pan it, or just, it won't be on their radar.
But hopefully it'll reach people that are maybe curious about, maybe on the edge of walking away, or, curious about the deconstruction world. Hopefully it'll give them a space to maybe start to question more, or to, I guess, feel at home if they are walking away from it.
Yeah. And I think, again, I'm really trying to just be truthful with this film, and honestly with all of my work, because so much of what being a Christian artist meant was programming the result that you want and working back from there. And, when I caved and did work like that, it was not true. And it's why so much, quote unquote, Christian art is so flat and just feels corporate,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the goal in the church. I mean, I was writing this right as we were leaving, and I actually had someone in pretty high leadership try and dictate to me how they wanted this film to end. And that, was one of my straws that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
But I think it's something as former Christians and artists we really have to guard against, is the concern of outcomes instead of following the work.
Mm-hmm.
I've really tried to follow the work with this. Let the characters be true and let them speak through.
That's great.
It's a really funny time to be trying to get this film off the ground. Not only is the, film world kind of in a state of collapse, but, we have a Christian nationalist in office, and
Yes.
yeah, it's real strange, but I think, the time for this film is now, and I'm doing everything in my power to make it happen. I'm just excited to see, even though things are a little bit dire right now in the world, the fact that this conversation has moved from coffee shop meetings to podcasts like yours. And now, Micah, you're seeing it too, into our cultural spaces like film, I think is really, really important. And I think we're reckoning with some things as a society, especially here in the US.
Yes, the reckoning is now. I see those two things as a sign to push even harder. That the film industry being what it is,
Yeah.
but stories matter more than ever right now.
Yeah.
And this messaging matters, I think, now more than ever too. And so I think now's the right time for both to converge, the stories to be told and the films to be made. And even if it's in the indie space, I think it's powerful, and I think it's what we need right now.
Yeah,
so
totally agree.
I see it as a sign to push harder, honestly.
Yep, absolutely. We didn't get into filmmaking because we just thought it was going to be an easy trip.
Right. Too stubborn for that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
With the evangelical background, where do you sit with it all now? Like, where are you at now with how you feel about all this?
So currently, I do not identify as a Christian. So I'm distinctly out of the church. As far as giving myself labels, I am kind of not there yet. I'm still, somewhat spiritual, but don't feel like I have the answers. And I'm okay with that. I think it's actually a really lovely place to be, to not live as though you have everything worked out and your way is truth. It's really human and freeing and beautiful. I love being out in nature, really feeds my soul. But going to a museum also does. That can feel quite sacred. Going to a film can feel sacred. So I just feel like that closeted, hidden part of me and the rest of me are finally like becoming just one thing. And that's amazing. It's probably going to be the project of the rest of my life, but it really is quite wonderful.
I love that. That's great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Big thanks to Cheryl for joining us and for sharing the story behind Girlie. If you want to stay connected to her work, we've got links in the show notes.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back soon on Exodus Brothers.